Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another live session with myself, Darren Baton from Elite EDM Stars. Today I'm going to carry on doing the session about bass lines. Last week we covered, I think it was minimal, tech and progressive house bass lines, and this session we're going to continue with electro house bass lines, minimal, I think, was it? No, sorry, fidget house bass lines, and also funky disco house bass lines. Now I want to make a disclaimer again at the start of this. I am using this Sample Magic's book for a sort of a guide to giving some instruction on how they would sort of guide you secrets to house music production, basically. Now, the disclaimer is that I've followed some of the instructions in here. I've used certain synthesizers, and the sounds won't always sound exactly the same. And secondly, the patterns and the riffs that they create, sort of examples they show you that I'm going to show you, are sort of questionable. That I question them. They don't sort of sound good to me. When I follow the instructions to make the sounds and the patches, they don't sound how I want them to sound. So that could be the synthesizer. It could be they're using different synthesizers. They're using Logic for some of their plugins. So I'm sort of limited to the different plugins. You have to be more creative. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run you through the content first. There's just a few slides. There's just three bass lines to go through. So there's about 4 or 5 slides, 6 slides. And then I'm going to show the examples I've got on the screen in a second and in Ableton Live, and then I'm going to show their examples, and then I'm going to show you how I would create them and how I'd have a go around and sort of, approaching this. And yesterday I spent a few hours putting the content together and sort of putting the bass lines together, following the instructions, trying to create the sounds. So I'm going to run that through with you, and then I'm going to show you what my examples are. I sort of just going to come up with 3 or 4 different bassline examples using a slap bass and an alternative sort of sounds and stuff, and how I would create them based on what they show you. So that's my disclaimer. I wanted to sort of get that out of the way first. That I'm just using this as a guide and approach. I've tried to follow this. So me as a music instructor for many years, following this information, relaying it back, but saying that I don't think it is overly correct. It's a good starting point, but it's not how I would approach it. I approach it in a different way. So there's a couple of examples I've done where I've played the bass lines in. There's a couple where I've programmed the bass lines in. Funky bass ones I tend to play them in because you want to play it more like a real bass guitar. So let's switch over. Let's come to the content. Let's just come to the slides. So developing your own house music style. Last week, as I mentioned, we covered 3 different types of bass lines: minimal, progressive, and tech house. The bass obviously supplies a low end energy and rhythmic balls, and occasionally the cracking melodies and the bass can make or break a track. And again, the disclaimer by Sample Magic, that's the information I'm using here. So in this session I'll be covering electro, fidget, disco, funky house bass programming. So let's get straight into it. Electro house bass lines. So electro house bass sounds are loud and proud, taking equal inspiration from rhythmic and lead bass styles. Swing can be used to add more bounce, and sidechain compression is used aggressively for added pump. A good synth is a prerequisite for the authentic electro tones. Choosing one with multiple oscillators and modulation sources. Try creating riffs with a call and response lines, and juggle these between 2 or more synths to create variations on the hook. Use the LFO to modulate the filter cutoff points to create tempo driven wobbles that cut across the groove to help keep things tight. Ensure that your LFO reset to re-trigger or sorry, I should say is reset to re-trigger with each new note that is BPM synced. Now the reason there might be odd word missing is because I've dictaphoned all these notes on, and to sort of save a bit of time. It is also worth experimenting with the LFO phrase and also the polarity, the direction and the parameters if they are available on the synthesizer, as this can help tighten up or change the feel of the rhythm pattern, and especially when using a ramp or a sine wave. So in Electro you will spend as much time fine-tuning your filter parameters as you will creating an original hook, and you won't stop when you've got a killer line. Electro Basslines, should be spelt with a double S, rarely stay the same for long. Instead, they keep changing with ongoing automation of both the modulation, depth and LFO throughout the track. So this is their bassline example from Sample Magic. The bass pattern above is a typical electro call and response that builds and works in two ways. Firstly, the shorter notes are played on the 8th and 32 note sequence, and then the response is on the 4th notes. Now, personally, this becomes very repetitive to me if you have to keep on playing this, and I'll show you what I mean later on. This is where you can play around with your filter parameters to create unique tones over time. So you could repeat the same riff, keep swapping the synths over, changing the notes for different synths. So you're gonna have to spend a lot of time building that up over a 2, 4, 6, 8 bar sequence and try and make it sort of not sound exactly the same. So there's nothing wrong with using that 1 bar MIDI loop, but bear in mind that you want to create some automation on that, and maybe use different synth sounds altogether, and just try layering different sounds together as well. So how to create an Electro House bassline. I hope you can see those oscillators at the top. The key to reduce Electro House bass is to start with several stacked oscillators, mix a saw wave with a sine wave 1 octave below, and a square wave 1 octave higher. So 3 oscillators there. Then mix in some white noise on the 4th oscillator to help it cut through the mix, but don't overdo it though, because your bass will become too aggressive and sound very trashy. And set the amp envelope to minimum attack, decay and release, and maximum sustain. And again, apologies for some of the capitalization, because that's my dictaphone. I didn't actually go through. Oops, and that shouldn't be coming up next. I don't know what's that's come backwards. So we'll just open all these up anyway, because I've got to put the order in the right order. So select a low pass filter, and then you set the cutoff point to around 33%. Add some filter envelope modulation if you can. I've added it in the mod envelope in silent in there, if you can see in that image, and set the medium decay, fast attack, minimum sustain and fast release. So this produces a nice chunky throbbing type sound. Add extra interest by modulating the filter with an LFO. Choose an upwards ramp, like a saw wave, with a rate of 1/16, and set the LFO to re-trigger on the key press and increase the modulation depth to get the bubbling rhythm. So again, you need to automate those parameters. Sometimes the LFO just doesn't fit with the groove, so if it doesn't, try changing the LFO phase if you can. You might not be able to do that, but maybe try changing the phase of the oscillators if you can do that. Maybe bring them out from stereo into mono. Just try messing around with a few things until you get it to work and fit. Sometimes the LFO doesn't, as I say, fit, so you can try that in 90 degrees, 180 and 270 degrees. And then just with an EQ, remove the lowest frequencies with a cut starting to around 20 to 30 hertz, and then just ramp it up and bump it up from there, so that you just not stripping out too much of the low end, but you don't want too much of it in, because it will clutter the mix. And just make it so that the sound gets clarity, and then call out a small notch and 200 to 500 hertz. If the bass needs extra density, boost around the 60 to 70 hertz range, and then squeeze it together with some compression with a fast attack, a medium release, and a ratio of 10 to 1. The 10 to 1 ratio will really squash it down almost in infinity and bring it right up in the mix. And it's all about bringing the low tones out and catching those high peaks and just sort of bring them together. That's the idea of the old compression, when you're almost pushing out a limit, sort of, you know, limiting threshold and limiting ratio. So we'll go into the tones in a sec. I'll come back to those, but in fact it might be worth playing those now and going through those, but I actually wanted to sort of do that later and develop those. I just wanted to go through the content first. So Fidget House Basslines are... Fidget is a funky brother of the Electro House, which doesn't care about breaking a few engineering rules to create funky bass noises. With its jacking groove, big cone bending, wonky LFOs and rave references, it can be hypnotic and deranged in equal measures, providing a few snatches of melody too. So copious use of distortion add to the filthy hardcore feel, and it's almost mandatory to use sidechain compression to bring out the womp of the beat. So you want that nice sort of pushing heavy sidechain pump. One of the key features in Fidget Basslines is to use the use of melodic changes on every 4th or 8th bar. So again, the pattern I'm going to show you is quite repetitive, so you need to spend a lot of time developing that, and I'm not going to have time to develop this particular pattern, but I have developed the electro and the funky house bass lines a bit more. I'm not so familiar with minimal house, Fidget House, than I am the other styles really. But anyway, so the key feature is the melodic changes every 4th and 8th bar. The variations can be made by changing some of the filter modulation settings, swapping oscillators to create different tones and textures, or jumping up an octave to cause a shift in bass pressure. So again, just automate your synthesizer parameters to change the oscillator sources and just tweak around with settings just to keep it creative. So this type of bass line here, you can see it's just quite simple, 1 bar loop. Nothing special about that at all. So the sliding bending character can be programmed in several ways. One way is to use a synth pitch bend manually on the synth. So if you have a pitch bend wheel, do it manually and then maybe record them in afterwards. Second is to use automation, obviously, so I've done that inside the actual envelope of the MIDI clip instead, and not on the automation lanes. So you want that to happen consistently to every clip. And again, second is use the automation, as you can see in the image above, and then increase the bend range on the synth to 1 octave either way, so that you get a 2 octave slide. So what I've done on silent is to create 12 notes pitch bend, so that I pitch bend from the top, passing 0 back down to the bottom, and that gives me a 24 note pitch bend range, and that allows me to pitch it down quickly and do different things with the pitch bend and create some interesting sort of attack type sounds on the bass. And the third way is to use portamento again, so you could overlap your notes there and use a little bit of portamento and automate the portamento in there as well. As new notes are triggered and held, the sound will glide between them. So to create a Fidget House bass line, you need to start with 2 saw wave oscillators and detune them opposite directions by a few fine tones. So you create almost like that ravey type sound, saw wave rave sound. It's almost like a Hoover. When you get the pitch bend, it will sing that kind of Hoover type ravey sound. This will create an analog chorus effect, and the sine wave oscillator, and add a sine wave oscillator and tune it down 1 octave for the added bass, and that will give you your sub. Turn the saw waves volumes up to around 60% and the sine sub up to 100%, and the relationship between the 3 oscillators influences how much low end welly you get in your bass line. So it's all according to what kind of bass you want. Do you want a kind of deep knocky bass, or do you want a little bit more less off? So just balance that relationship. Select a 24 dB low pass filter and set the cutoff to around 500 Hz and resonance to around 50%. Set a sine wave LFO to modulate the filter cutoff. Ensure it is BPM synced to 1/8 note. You can see in the image I've got above there, and it trigger starts on each note as well. So again, you want to make sure that your re-trigger is on your oscillator so that the note starts at the very, very first zero starting point of the sine wave or the saw wave. Then increase the amount of resonance and modulation depth to bring out the flapping sound. Modulate the parameters to taste again as well. Third, we get a filthy with some overdrive distortion or a bit of big crusher effects on there. You can see on this example I've put an overdrive and I've crushed the sound as well a little bit. They can be stuck on as an insert for fully coated sound, or blend them with a dry signal on an auxiliary bus or send. The choice is yours really. Just make sure that if you are doing them on a bus send, that you turn up the wet and dries full on the sounds, so to make sure that the full signal is going through to the auxiliary send channel. With the bus send method, use EQ after the effect to get more polished sound as well. Yeah, so that sort of just tidies up the sound a little bit, rather than you sort of allows you to sort of again scope it out. Think of it like a piece of wood. You're chipping away at and shelving the sounds. Listen for honky mid-range and muddy low-ended frequencies and scoop those out with the parametric EQ, as you can see in the example above. And then you set up a sidechain compressor and drive it with the kick drum. So use the kick rather than a sidechain signal, because when the kick drum stops playing, you want those bass notes to pump back out and sort of jump out in the mix and stuff. Set up a sidechain compressor with the kick maxed out, but I wouldn't say max out the threshold, because particularly in my example, you can see there I haven't maxed the threshold, because if I do, I lose the sound completely. So it is done to suit the taste really. This will cut the volume to silence when the kick drops. We want that. We really do want the bass notes to cut to silence, but again, adjust the attack and to minimum and release to maximum. So because what you want it to do, you want the compressor to release up very, very sort of slowly, so it brings the bass notes sort of up as well with it. So when the kick drum pumps down, pushes the bass away, brings those tones back out, but not too quickly. So lower the release until the bass line bounces. And again, apologies for the spelling there. Experiment with different compressors and add some stereo width. Now, in the next session, I'm going to cover more stereo width and sub bass. We're going to be going sub bass into more depth and cover sort of mixing sub bass and making some stereo bass as well out of that. And stereo bass, you should be more in the mid range really, and keep your subs in mono all the time. Think of a club system, or think of a mobile phone, or a speaker, a small stereo speaker that's only got one speaker. You have to think about those sounds being in mono as well, so they fill out that spectrum on one speaker. So moving on, last one, we've got disco and funky house bass lines. So moving away from the electro-led bass lines are the myriad that exist in the disco, Latin, deep genres, which use a mix of sample-derived live lines alongside cleverly programmed synthesizers. Programming live bass can be daunting, but a little knowledge of how the instrument is played will get you a long way. So what I try and do, I try and mimic how I would play a bass. If I've got a bass guitar in my hand, and where would I play it? And then I sort of listen to the notes, tones on the keyboard, and I do a similar kind of thing and try and play with that kind of plucky kind of feel. That a bass with sort of long notes, short staccato, stacky notes, like for the plucks. So any synth is capable of generating a nice warm monotonic signal, which is up to the job of producing the raw bass tone. In many ways, the simpler the better. You're looking for a raw tone wave with a sine or a square sub layer and an octave below to thicken it up. Now, this example I had difficulty creating at first, and then a few tricks that I did with it to get it sounding how I wanted to, sort of made it sound a lot better. I ended up switching my synth from Silence to a different synth into Saurus, because I hadn't got that sub bass layer on Silence that I was looking for, and I wasn't able to change the sort of the tones of the sub bass layer, which you can on Saurus. And Source is a little bit more analog-y sounding as well. Like in the example they're using here, they're using a Novation bass station, which I used to have down here somewhere. Let me one sec. I do have these old plugins down here, B station and the bass station, but unfortunately I can't get them to work on this computer. There's no disk drive, what it looks like on the new Macs anymore. I can't seem to find a disk drive, and I can't get those to install, so unfortunately I can't show you the examples in the bass station, which would have been nice to replicate because it gives you that sort of retro funk bass. It was designed to be like the Roland 303 really. As you can see on the image there, you can see how it looks. It's kind of quite simple retro 1-2 oscillators, sub oscillator. But anyway, moving on. So this bass line here, again, I question the example. It's it's all right. It's a nice starting pattern. It's a typical walking type bass line which moves up and down the octaves, and I haven't adjusted any velocities on this at all. But to recreate the sound of a real bassist, change the velocity of the hits and note lengths. Again, I haven't changed the velocity hits on this at the moment. I've just created them, and we're going to do that in real time and stuff in a second. To use subtle amounts of portamento to mimic the slides. Don't be afraid to push the notes off grid as well, so that they weave in and out the groove. They don't always have to be on the grids. You can see some of the notes there are off the grids and slightly pushed. Either before the beat, giving the rhythm a feel of urgency, or to just behind to give it a lazier feel. So the example on the right, the example above uses a classic step disco octave wave with a few short pluck notes to sort of drive the groove. Now again, I question these examples. To me, they don't sound good, and when I create the sound, it didn't sound good. So that's why I had to find a different synth. So how to create this disco sound? To make this sound simple, start with a saw or on an oscillator 1. And set this a square on the sub oscillator. Set the attack envelope to should be around 0 with a sustain of 100% and release time 0.2. This yields instant attack and decay just like a tight disco bass. The resonance should sit around 20% to give a nice sort of warm sound. Now run your synth. Now this example in the book, in the Secrets to House Music by Sample Magic book, they use Logic and they use the auto filter in Logic, which has got different parameters to what Ableton Live has got. So I've had to do something slightly different, and I want to show you with the examples with and without. And then I want to show you the examples with a sort of slap bass and how the slides with portamento or the pitch bends I've created sound much more realistic. So run your synthesizer through a DAW native auto filter plugin. It can really fill out the low mids to create a classic funk house sound. Here the resonance sits around 48%. I've got 41% on this one particularly, but again, tweak around with this. With the cutoff around about 38%. There it's sitting around 440 Hz on this example, but I'm going to show you these in a second. Rolling off the high frequencies, adding a rich resonant sweet spot. What I've done in this example is I've used a bandpass frequency instead, and you'll see why. It gives it a little bit more sort of funk to it. And set the fatness to 99% if possible. I can't do that on here. I have to use the envelope depth instead. So the compressor supplies additional energy to the bass line, driving the signal by a few decibels while adding some attack bite and fast release to keep it sitting tight in the groove. Now you can see I've used makeup gain on that as well. Ableton doesn't come with the makeup gain actually switched on anymore. It comes switched off, so you have to add that. Be in mind when you're reducing the gain, you want to do either your makeup gain manually or do you want to do it automatically. Note the threshold is set to fairly low, only taking in the louder hits so that not to squash the life from them. Last in the insert chain is the EQ, which is a steep low cut to remove unnecessary bottom end, and a gentle shelving high cut filter rolls off the top end that would interfere with any keys and guitar sounds. And a notch around 370 Hz gives the bass some bite, with a gentle boost at 180 Hz gives it some oomph. So next session I will be covering bass, sub bass, stereo bass and mixing bass. And that's it. So let's get into the examples. We can get rid of that now. I'm going to get into the examples. I'm going to play through them. Like I say, I'm going to walk through the electro bass. I'm going to walk through the fidget, and then play the examples of these basses. The funky one, I'm going to show you their examples, and then I'm going to go and show into my examples. Okay, guys. So stay with me on this one. I'm going to go silent for a while and get into it and play you through the examples. Then I'm going to go. I'll finish. I'll come back and I'll show you my examples. Okay guys, so that's their examples from, as I say, the Secrets to House Music Production. Those are not mine. So what I'm going to show you now is my examples from how I'd approach this. And I'm going to focus on the electro one for a little while first, and then I'm going to go over into the funky house one and show you the examples I've created myself. You can see a few more examples here. And so let's start with the electro house one. And what I did first of all is played a completely different riff in, or sort of program this riff in, and I got a new sound in Silent. I just went into my sound banks, went to the Vandalism electro sort of sounds, found a nice bass to start with, just to start programming the riff with, and then the next steps would be to sort of start stepping it out, finding different sounds for it, patching it across, and building up a sort of different, you know, sections. And I could even go along into actually extending this bass riff even more into a 2-bar. And I think let's do that. What I would do is I would maybe have that on over here, and then we could have that beat again at the start. Setting, so we could go like that, and then do a different call and response. Let's have a listen. So I'm going to play these through, and we'll start building this up, and I'll go into the other sequence mode. I'm going to drag these clips into here. Hang on, let me 1 second, because the mixer is so wide at the moment. Let's see where we are. Let's get this into some kind of order. Okay, so that's where we want to go. So I'm going to take my electro bass and drop it into here. I'm just going to build up a loop, start on the 17-bar loop here, so you can see the screen. Let's go into this mode. Actually, I've just realised that we've got to make that a 2-bar loop first of all. Okay, so I can now play this. This is my idea. So something like that, guys. And then what we could start doing is literally just duplicating that, finding another sound. So maybe find a lower tone bass for these low sections. We could start cutting that up. If I'd recorded this in, I'd have a MIDI comp, but I don't. Let's actually see if we can add automation lanes. Oh, there we go. We could actually create automation lanes versions of it. But we wouldn't be able to swap the synths over. The idea is to duplicate and create another synth. So what we want to do is start chopping sections out. I always forget about that. That's the new automation bars. I've just found something sort of handy in Ableton. If you do this very quickly with the automation, that's like a little window lane that you can sort of drag your automation across with. It allows you to drag automation and slide the automation around. Sorry about this. I'm just our computer's having a bit of wobbly. Yeah, live is about to do a crash on me. Doesn't like that. Sorry about this, guys. No, it's dead. Okay, we should be back. Let me just check that everything's running okay. Yeah, sound is back. Okay, that's fine. Right, let's try again, guys. Sorry about that. A minor crash going on. That was a bit mad. So, where were we? Yeah. Need to click that on first of all. We're going to put this into a bit of a loop. And then we're going to start looking for some different sounds on this. I want to take that off there. Don't want any automation on at all. So let's have a look at what we've got. What can we find in here? So let's have a look at my sound banks. We've got electro, famous patches, house sounds, pumping patches. Let's try some of these, see what we got in that. So you get the kind of idea, guys. It's a lot, you know. I haven't got the sort of scope in the time and to sort of go through the entire tutorial, but that's kind of what you want to start doing, is building up your different sections and different things, automating parameters, going in there, maybe putting a little parameter in this, putting this into fine like this, and then just going in and maybe banging in a bit of automation and just make it quirky. Maybe add you know, like a filter bend off there, like things like that, and just try things out, really, adding a saw in there. And you get the message, guys. You know what I mean? So it's a lot of messing around. It's a lot of faffing around parameters and really sort of fine tuning on things. You know, you can see there how I've done that just very, very quickly. And some synthesizers are different to others. Obviously, if you use something like Serum, for example, you could go in and automate those parameters inside there and do those wobbles and things inside the actual sound. But this is me doing it on a very, very quick example, finding different sounds. I would probably find a different sound for this a little bit more up front. Let's have a look at this one again. So just in case you didn't hear me, so what you do is you've got to get things working with each other. Wasn't sure where the microphone went off then, guys. But this is just a quick example of what you can sort of do. You know, you've got to sort of faff around inside the synthesizer or inside here and try and play around with it, get it to sort of modulate and stuff. And it will take a long time, guys. It's not going to happen overnight. Do you know what I mean? Be prepared for sort of tedious going over the same thing over and over and over again, getting the sections right. So we're going to sort of change this bass. What I was just doing there was putting the groove into the bass line so it follows the same groove as the electro beat I've got running in the background. Now again, it's not the best electro beat, so what I would do is obviously change some of those sounds. Let's go in and do that. I'm just mindful of time. I want to do the funky bass line in the next 15 minutes and then we'll sort of finish up this session, ready for the next one on sub bass. I will try and do two sessions a week again, but unfortunately I've not had the time, guys. I'm trying to get the website going. Just about to finish my first book on the introduction to Ableton Live and making your first track, and I'm trying to build the course for that. And unfortunately I've had a problem with the course page. It's not loading when I create the content and load it on the front end. It's not loading the page, so it's just a little issue I've got with that, and that's one reason why I haven't actually put the website live yet. I was going to, and then I'm just going to hold off until we got our first course on there. So there was just a few more things, content and something, you know, of what we're actually trying to do with the academy. So I decided to sort of leave it off. But anyway, let's get back to this. What I was going to do is just find maybe an electro sample. So let's just come into some Vengeance stuff very quickly. What we got in here? That's Future House stuff. I'm just looking for, I wonder if they're in the extra ones. Yep, there they are. Doing Electro Essentials quickly, and let's go into a loop. And you get the picture, guys. So let's move on to the next one, the funky house bass. So again, I'll play you their example. I'm going to play you a couple of examples I've done in there here. Let's just show you the synth. So one oscillator here, and then the sub oscillator on a square, and that's all it's playing in this. It's just mixed in slightly, it's not overdone, they're just mixing together nicely, and then the cutoff down a lot. So let me play you these sounds again, and I'll play you mine, and then I'll show you the examples I've done, and I'll show you slightly variations of how I would go around playing these kind of bass lines, or sort of programming them in myself, with that bass player's mindset. Okay, so on these examples, these are a couple of examples that I created myself. So that was the Sample Magics one. That's got a bit of bend on there, and you'll see playing through. Okay guys, so what I did obviously on these are just different variations. I was just playing around with the pitches and the slides. Didn't use any portamento on this one particularly. I just used a natural pitch bend. It tends to work well more on the funky slap basses, but this is a typical sort of bubbly, sort of acidy, bubbly, sort of a funky sounding sort of funk, you know, that kind of funk bubble bass, what I'd say. What I did here, if you notice, there's a couple of slides bending in between those notes there, but the pattern is a typical sort of up and down, playing a low octave, sort of playing a low note and sort of playing the riff across the top. So keeping the low note for a contrary motion and creating the sort of the riff pattern across the top, and then stepping up at the very end to create that sort of walking type bass feel. I feel that they, you know, these to me sound a lot more funkier. They, you know, I would be happy with the way these patterns sound in a track. So just coming on to this one, what I've done on these they're exactly the same patterns, but I've got a slap bass sound. Now I'll play you the slap bass. And that's again Sample Magic's example. Now I'll play you my examples and you'll see the pitch slides. So there you can see, guys, by sort of layering those two slap basses together and that acid sort of bass, pumping the filter resonance up on the bandpass filters, almost creating that sort of type vowel filter. So you're almost getting that kind of wow, 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 wow on the sound, and you'll hear that a lot on sort of progressive house basses, especially by Merck and Cremont, those guys. See if I've got some samples, examples of those I can show you. Maybe may take me a while. Yeah, I can't remember where they are. I got some samples from these guys, and there they are, Merck and Cremont style. That's the ones. So you'll hear it on these types of basses. That's actually a good example of a really nice sort of solid sort of clicky type progressive bass by Merck and Cremont. It's not the ones I'm looking for, but some of their bass lines, they'll use like a vowel filter on them. See, those are the types of sounds where they can use those vowel filters on them as well. They're very thin leads, and they're just really heavily sidechain pressed, compressed as well. So those are the types of that's kind of like where electro sort of went, or sort of progressive electro kind of went with the Merck and Cremont sound, and then electro for me sort of went with the more complextro. So what I would do with that electro bass, I'm going to come back onto this electro bass example for a second into here. What I would do is maybe look for a complextro sample that I could cut up and chop up and just take little elements and wobbles, and then and try and recreate some of those elements with some of the synthesizers I've got as well, with some of the sounds. For example, if you come into my Silent in Vandalism, I've got so many different types of banks that I could go into and look for a sound. You've got dubstep type stuff. We could go in there and get those kind of dubstep. You got electros, the electro ones I've got there. I've got dirty sounds. I could go and look for a sort of dirty type bass and layer under these and start doing all different types of stuff. In fact, that's what I'm going to have a go at this. I'm going to push this session on for a little bit longer, just for an extra about 10-15 minutes, and then we'll wrap it up. I just want to sort of show you a few different examples of how I approach this electro. It's been a while since I made Electro House, but this is how a few ideas I'd start to develop the track. So let's just get into it. So that's what the kind of example I was looking for, guys. That's kind of a classic example of complextro. So, you know, the dirty sort of dirty electro sound that went further forward, came out of Brazil and Germany sort of massively, and that's the kind of sort of sounds that I would go for. Start cutting up those little sounds. They're just little one hits, dashes, layered, stacked. Okay, I just wanted to play that through so you could hear. Can you hear all the individual hits going through? If I was to drag that into here, for example, you could see how long that is. Look, hang on, I need to find a blank MIDI, blank audio. No space in my sequencer. And you can see how far that loop goes. Look, so that's literally an 8-bar loop, and you can see literally everything. You can almost reverse engineer the actual audio. The sounds obviously would take a lot longer to do and create. You've got to go in and create those individual sounds, stack up all of the individual synths, find the sounds, find the hits, and they're basically just hits stacked across, almost all in the same key, following the same pattern, following your rhythm, and they're playing them, and they're just triggering certain patterns with wobbles, synths doing different things. Very time consuming to make, very, very, very time consuming, and hence the word complextro. It is complex electro. So, you know, I've tried to dabble with it a few times. It's, you know, it's mind-boggling. It's head doing. It's for me got a little bit too messy and too frustrating, so I kind of backed away from the kind of sound for a while. It was just too much for me to keep sitting there fiddling around and trying to get different parameters all the time. I like to make my music flow, hence why I've gone the sort of deep house, back to my sort of roots of music. And I love garage house music and future house. I love progressive house, but I've just literally gone back more to sort of this sort of garagey deep piano style summer sounding, and that's kind of me mellowing out as I approach. I won't say my age, but that's kind of where it is. But yeah, I mean, you know, you could take this, guys. I mean, you can't use it all because of obviously for copyright reasons and stuff. And Vengeance are very hot on this kind of stuff now. And I know a lot of people spent a lot of time. They actually used to take these samples and build a whole track around them and just release it as their own. And they still do. But I just know that it's, you know, it's not. There's no point really. You might as well just use this stuff for learning curves. Listen to every individual sound, go through, and you can see the timings. Everyone's just it's covering one beat. If I bring that, look, every beat, look, one beat, one beat, one beat. So every bass is kind of just starting and sort of kind of a bit of a, you can see the sidechain compression. So every note is starting on the beat. So it's a case of wobble every beat of the bar, and then heavy sidechain compression. You can see by the waveform. If I was to bring the original waveform in, the synths without the sidechain, you will see so you can almost hear there's gating going on there, and if you look at your waveform, you can kind of sort of almost work out what they're doing with the sections. So you play them through. Okay, you play your waveform through, and you can sort of almost see what it's doing. So you could plot out your electro riff with your synth, find a few synths, chop up your elements, and almost come away from this type of riff, what I'm doing here, this MIDI type of riff. But you can see that that is just one hit, so that I can move these notes, hit one sound, another sound on the bar there, another sound on the bar there. So that's almost what electro's doing for me in this complex sound. You can see, look, and again, that's heavy sidechain compression coming in down on the beat again every single time. So if I look at the beat, there's the beat, sidechain, 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 sidechain. But it's playing a note, a different sound, a complex sound on every individual note of the bar, or beat of the bar, should I say. So that gives you a clue on how to sort of plot out your electro patterns. Don't think that you've got to go into a MIDI pattern like this and do it like this. In fact, you could start like this. This is how it would be, literally like that. Every pattern, every note would just be on the bar like that, playing a full note, a full note. So it's playing the whole things, triggering things, and then you could sidechain each individual element, and you just chop them up. You could go in there like that, and then just chop these sections up, split them. You've got each note, plot them down, 5 or 6, 7 different synthesizers, drop them down into the mix, and then that's it. You kind of layer and stack them up. Go into each one, loop it, play around with the sound till you get it exactly right. Now, instead of actually sidechaining each individual synth, save your processing power and put all of them into a group like I've done here. Bring the sidechain down onto the one, and then also, when you've got those sounds, if you want to bring them up front in the mix, put a multi-band compressor onto the actual group and max out the multi-band, bring it out the grit and bring the sounds out so that they're all level, and then use a compressor and a limiter just on the end, the very end, just to sort of tighten the whole thing up. But that's what I kind of do there, guys. I'd sort of, you know, there's a lot of complexities in that completely. And too much for me to sort of sit there and go through an entire tutorial in Complextro. But that's me trying to sort of give you an introduction on how to sort of go around looking at your different electro sounds, find what you've got, look at tutorials on how to make those types of sounds. There's some good stuff out there, there's some bad stuff out there, and just try and sort of emulate it. But that for me is a great guide, really, sort of to see how you can see the pattern is just literally one note, one note, one note, one note, playing a different, a unique individual sound. So to finish off, guys, what I can sort of kind of hear is you've got some like low tone basses here with the filters right down. You've got some sort of high-end saw sounds here, a few sort of swingy synths going on. So there's a few. It looks like there's a MIDI riff going on in there in the synth to create like an RP kind of synthy pluck, and you can almost see the gates and the chopping there on the sounds. Look. Whether they've sort of mixed that down to audio. So created all the sounds first, mix it down to audio, then chop it up afterwards and go in and make the edits and chops. I don't know how they've pieced these together. One guy you could ask is Michael Scalis. I think he's this guy from behind Vengeance Sound. He's a guy who sort of came up with all these packs. He's a genius of a producer. I used to buy a lot of his tracks on vinyl many years ago. But that kind of wraps it up for today, guys, really. As I say, next week we're going to cover a bit of stuff on sub bass. Again, I'm going to be using sort of stuff from the Sample Magic Secrets to House Music Production. The reason I'm using this, just to sort of clarify, is because I want to show you that not all the material out there and all the guides and all the books that you buy out there are going to actually help. The terminology, the talking about certain things and production tips and things in there, and you know, trying things out. Some of the stuff is good, trying things on the snares and the claps and the techniques, but not everything is as it says. And I wanted to show you that. I wanted to sort of say, well, look, I've read these books. I've read all of these books I've got down here. I've got hundreds and hundreds of books on music production. I've read pretty much most of them when I was at university. And I wanted to sort of just portray that information across that. Don't trust everything out there. Don't trust all the information. Trust your ears. Trust what you see visually in front of you. Look for the sound sources and the packs that suit the style that you're trying to make. And try and listen to them and reverse engineer those sounds and understand what's going on in there. And that's the only thing I can sort of give you, really. I've spent 25 plus years trying to find my style, different sounds, and that's exactly where I've got to now. So I've just got I've got a track that I showed you not long ago, which is almost getting close to being finished. That was the start of this developing your own style. That was the garage house track that I started on the piano house track. That's almost pretty much there now. Just a few tweaks, and then I've got to start mixing it and engineering it ready for mastering. I'm going to send it off for a mastering engineer to a mastering plant rather than do it myself. I'd rather just trust what I've got the sound in my acoustic studio, and I'm lucky that my panel hasn't fallen off. It's fallen off just before the start of this live session earlier on. It's twice it's fallen off now. I'm going to have to put some new sticky pads on the back of it, but I'm glad it stayed up and didn't bump throughout the end of this session. But anyway, guys, yeah, so you know, your mixing is just as important, and your sounds that you use is going to make the mix sound quality really good straight away. And that's why I look for sound sources, or I look for individual sound samples that I can use as a source and make a bass from, and sort of just resample stuff really and recreate things. You know, you haven't got to use everything. Chop some of these sections out and use them in your tracks. Don't use the whole element. Try and recreate a new riff around it. But yeah, this is, as I say, just to try and sort of show you how to develop your own style. And like I say, I've spent years going through these sample kits and packs and stuff, and you know, just making tracks, making ideas, understanding how the flow of a track works. Never releasing any of them, just learning from them, use them as a creative learning curve to understand the flow of an electro track or the flow of a progressive house track. And that's what's helped me develop my style to where I am today. And I'm really, really happy and comfortable with the style that I'm doing. I've got two sort of styles of I like to release under, as I say, progressive and house, and not the sort of Hardwell type progressive house anymore. It's more sort of a little bit more laid back, and sometimes progressive trance I do as well under DB9. But my most styles now are sort of like a cross between sort of house and garage in terms for my dirty mid-range styles. And it's took me many years to get to that, and experimenting, looking for sound and understanding how things work. And I'm just trying to share my knowledge with you guys really as much as I can. So yeah, this is the end of the session, and big thumbs up if you like this stuff. Please give me a big thumbs up on my channel, and it helps the algorithm, it helps me grow, it helps YouTube tell me that, you know, you like the content, and it just helps me all round really. It's helped me to sort of grow this brand, and I will bring more content in the coming weeks. I've got a little surprise coming soon. I've teamed up with the guys from Auteria, so I'm going to be going over their plugins and stuff and going into depth with those. So stay tuned, guys. Have yourselves a great weekend. I'll see you very soon. Take care. Bye bye.